Well, thank you, everyone. I'm Bill Schulz. I am a senior consultant with Turnkey. I think in my case, senior consultant just means that I'm old. Um, I, uh, I've been with Turnkey about 6 years. I was a GP user for 6 years before that, so I'm about 12 years on the platform. Today, we're going to talk about cash application in Dynamics GP. It's a basic function, but it's a pretty critical one for most users. So let's set the scene for that. You have already entered in GP a sale invoice of some kind, whether it's from sales order processing or from transaction entry, the receivables module. You've created an invoice, and there's a $100 receivable sitting in accounts receivable right now, and now you've received a check from the customer. And so the question is, well, what do we do next? How do we handle that check? So we're going to talk today about cash receipts. We're gonna go through the cash receipts window, and we're gonna actually do a couple cash receipts. We'll also talk about apply sales documents. You know, as part of the cash receipt process, you apply cash. You apply the cash to an invoice, an open invoice. So we'll go into the apply sales documents. How do you deal with situations where you didn't apply your cash receipt initially? We're also going to talk briefly about Lockbox and cash posting on receivable transactions and sales transaction entries. Although those are not the point of today's session, I just want to make sure we mention them so you understand the functionality of those and how they relate to the cash receipts transaction. So for cash receipts, to get there, we're going to start with the sales pane. We'll go to transactions and then cash receipts. You can also use the menus if you're more comfortable with the menu process. You start with transactions, then go to sales and cash receipts. So that's how we get there, and this is what the screen looks like. So let's go jump into GP. So here I am in GP. I'm going to go to sales. I'll look at my transactions, and I'm going to the cash receipts down here near the bottom of this list. For some of you, you might have to drag down to get to it, but there's cash receipts. And then here's my basic cash receipt window. The first thing you'll notice is that there is a receipt number. In my case, it's PYMNT 000297. That's pre-numbered. It's set up in your receivable setup. You can change that if you say, you know what, I never did like that. I want that to say cash, or I want that to say receipts, or CR, or something like that. You can change that. You can see that I can modify this as I'm doing cash receipts. My recommendation would be that you not let the auto numbering happen. It's going to put them in sequential order. Let that just occur as it naturally does. That's probably the best bet. So the first thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to go over to batch ID. I'm going to create a batch. We'll call this Bill Schulz test. It's going to ask, do you want to add this batch? And I'll say yes. I want to create a new batch for these receipts. You'll notice it's already completed the origin, the posting date. That's, if you notice, that's my system date down here in the bottom left-hand corner of my screen. We're always a few years out in advance on the demo client. But there's my posting date, and that's the GL posting date. And that's going to be important that you recognize that difference. We'll talk about that in just a second. But that's the GL posting date. And then it pre-fills the checkbook ID. It gets that from the receivable setup again. So you can find whatever account you use most often as your default checkbook. It's set it to single use frequency. I can make changes on any of these, but for the most part, I'm just going to accept them and say save. I don't have to make any changes. Just go right back to my transaction. The next field then is the document date. Now this is different than the posting date, the GL posting date that was on the batch screen. This is my document date. Now for some of you, you might have a little expansion arrow right here next to a little calendar, a little blue arrow, and that's because if you've got your posting date, in my case, coming from the batch, then it gets the GL date from that batch screen. But if you've turned on your options to get your posting date from the transaction, then you'll get that little expansion arrow there, and you'll be able to tell each transaction what's the document date, and then go to the expansion arrow, and what GL date do I want to post that in my GL to. And you can do that transaction by transaction. Mine's set up to get the date from the batch, so it goes to the batch screen, and there I don't get that individual transaction date. Okay, but I'm going to change this in my case, 0409, just to demonstrate that I can post, I want to make that 27, I'm sorry, 40927. I can change that date to be any date. The document date can be any date. It doesn't have to match the GL posting date. I'm going to enter the customer's ID, and if I know it, I can just type it. If I don't know it, I'm going to look it up. On my lookup window, I can look it up by customer ID. I can look it up by customer name. I can do some additional sorts out here. And with the custom sort, I can even look based on just about any field in the customer record. But let's say I know what my customer is. It's Aaron Fitz, and so I'm going to use that one right there. I'm going to select it, and it brings that customer ID in. The next box then is the currency ID. If you're working in a multi-currency environment, you've got all your currencies to pick from there, and so you can determine based on what denomination, what currency you've received your payment in, and GP does all the currency translations for you. I'm going to stay with US dollars today. You'll notice there's a little box out here. I'm going to mention this briefly. Locate customer by. Laura will talk about that a little bit later today, so I'm not going to go into that today. And then you've got the boxes here: check, cash, credit card, and EFT. Okay, so this is how did you receive this cash? The transaction is going to do the same thing regardless. Basically the same thing. It's going to debit a cash account of some kind or a credit card account in the case of credit cards. It's going to debit an account and it's going to credit your AR account, right? Because you're taking money out of AR and you're receiving cash for it. So the basic transaction is the same, but there's some little bit different boxes depending on which choice I make. If I've got check turned on or EFT, either one, you'll note that I've got an amount field, I've got a checkbook ID, I've got a credit check number or credit card number, and I've got a comment ID, a comment information I can put in there. If I go to cash, I've still got the amount and the checkbook. I don't have that check number anymore. I just have a comment I can put in there. If I choose credit card, I have the amount field. I have a credit card ID. Now I'll have to have set up some credit cards in order to use this. But the credit card setup basically will tell it to take the debit and apply it to that credit card account as opposed to the bank account. And all that depends on your credit card setup. And then I also have the check or credit card number. It's a reference number. It's really not the card number. You wouldn't want to put the customer's credit card number in that field, just to make sure you understand that point. This is a reference number. It's not the actual card number. This is not PCI compliant, so you would never want to store a customer's credit card information. And then I have a comment field. Today I'm going to stick with a check. It's easy. I'm going to apply $470, let's say. Let's say I got a $470 check from this customer today. It's check number 12345. I don't have any comment to put. And now I want to apply that to the invoices, the open invoices. I've got a couple ways I can do that. I can do auto apply, and auto apply will simply go out and get either the oldest invoice or the lowest number invoice. Actually, I should say the earliest due date invoice or the lowest number invoice. My system is set up to do the lowest number. So if I click auto apply, and then we go look at the apply, we'll see what's happened there. It picked the lowest numbered invoices. So INVS comes before sales, and sales 109 comes before sales 1011. And so it applied $8 to this one, it applied $460 to this one, and that's the way it did it. Now maybe I get to this window and I say, you know what, I don't really like that auto apply. Let's unapply this and let's redo it. I'm going to apply some to this invoice and some to this invoice and some to this invoice, and that's the way I want to apply it. And all that's based on the information I got from the customer on their remittance advice. Or maybe I come in here and I say, no, I know this $470 is paying this $473 invoice. And I know this customer well enough to know they're not going to pay that other $3.93. So I'm either going to have to sit with that $3.93 on my receivables balance for the rest of the time I have this customer, or I can go ahead and write it off right away. I would I would propose that you go ahead and write it off right away. If you know you're not going to collect that, it's a difference of some kind, they're taking a discount, or for some reason they're just short paying their invoice, then go ahead and deal with it now. Don't make yourself do something later, okay? I can either take this as a terms discount. So in this field here, $393, you'll notice the amount remaining now goes to zero. The terms amount is shown as $393. GP will go look at what's the terms discount account that you've set up either for this customer or for your company as your default account, and that's the account it's going to debit with that $3.93. If instead of a terms discount, I decide to take it as a write-off, the only difference, everything's kind of the same. It's still going to take the document to zero. It's going to fully apply the payment, but it's going to take it to the write-off account instead of the terms discount account. So it's going to look up a different account number. And so it just depends on how you want to process that transaction. Okay, so I'm going to say, okay, I've now applied that $470 properly. We can go look at the distribution, and you'll see the distribution shows cash. There's my $470 getting debited to my bank account. There's the $3.93. It went and got this account 6700 as my write-off account. If I'd chosen that trade discount account, this would say trade instead of write, and this would be the trade discount account, which I think is 4814 or something like that in my case. Okay, so there's my write-off account, and then here's my credit to accounts receivable of $473. So that's taking the full $473 out of AR on my GL. Okay, so that's my default. Preferably, if you got your system set up, you don't really have to make any changes on the distribution screen. You can look at it to make sure everything looks okay. You don't even have to go into that screen. If you know that everything's being set up properly, you can just leave it alone and just go on. So I've completed that transaction. Let's save that. Let's do one more, because I want to talk about one more feature, and I'll leave that 4.9 now. Let's use the account National. So I've got an account called National. Now National is different in that it is a national account relationship. So this is the parent called National, and there are two children accounts under that, Child 1 and Child 2. So it's a parent-child relationship that's already been established. The thing that this gives me the ability to do then is to apply this payment, and let's say I've got in this case, I'm going to do a $4,000 payment. This gives me the opportunity to do a $4,000 payment, but apply it to either invoices from the national account, the customer ID national, or any of the children. Let's start with the national. So I've set this to national. You can see auto apply to national, auto apply to national account, auto apply to national. If I do auto apply and I go look at that apply document, you'll see nothing's been applied. My original amount was $4,000. My unapplied amount is still $4,000. And the reason for that is Child 1 has got some invoices. Child 2 has got some invoices. But the account national doesn't have any outstanding invoices right now. So that didn't really accomplish anything. However, if I click national account and I do that auto apply, and I look at my apply button now to see what it's done, it's picked the lowest numbered invoice. So sales 1017 comes before sales 1019, 1023. So it picked the lowest numbered invoice and applied the $4,000 to that. Now it happened to be a $5,000 invoice, so it only applied $4,000 against it, leaving a balance of $1,350 on that invoice. If that's fine, then I can leave it alone. If I say, you know what, I don't really want that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply $2,500 to this customer, Child 1. So let's just do this, $2,500 on this invoice. And I'm going to apply $2,500 to Child 2. And in Child 2, I'm just going to just say auto apply. And so now it's gone through and it's picked the invoices to apply that $1,500. I put $2,500 on Child 1, leaving me $1,500 for Child 2. So put $1,337 against this first invoice, fully paying it off. It put $160 against the second invoice, fully paying it off, and it put $1.40 against this invoice, leaving me a balance of $266. So that's what the auto apply did for me there. Okay. So if I'm satisfied with the way it's been applied, then I can leave that alone. I'm going to unapply in this case. I want to go do one more um, thing. I'm going to show the, I'm going to apply the invoice to these two invoices. There we go. And it leaves a $14 unapplied amount. I'm going to leave that alone for right now. I'm going to pay off just these two invoices for this customer, leaving a $14 balance. Maybe that's what I got from the customer on their remittance advice. Okay. I'll say okay. Now it's okay to have partially applied transactions. So I can either have a fully applied, partially applied, or completely unapplied. Any of those work. And then I can, I didn't put a check number in there. Maybe it's check number 45678. All right. So I'm going to save that. Now let's go post this batch. Close that window. I've got two items in my batch, $4,400 total. Let's post it. I don't need these journals. I don't need to see these. We'll let that work. All right, with a cash receipts, there's one more piece that you've got to finish up. I didn't put this on my notes. I should have. We're going to have to go over to the deposits to make a bank deposit for those two receipts. So this is the last step in cash receipts, right? So my account was the Upton, my bank checkbook was the Upton Trust account. 0409 was my, how am I getting 12 from? Is my date. 4927 was the date. Let's look at deposits from 0409. 040927. Redisplay. And you'll see there's my two deposits. There's a $470 check and a $4,000 check. Those are the checks that I have in my hand and that I've received from the customers, and I needed to apply. And I'm going to put those in a batch. I'm going to write up a deposit ticket. I'm going to take it down to the bank and deposit $44.70 to my bank account today. So I need to do a deposit to record that in my checkbook in GP. Now, the GL entry has already happened. So when the cash receipt transaction happened, it posted my subledger, my accounts receivable subledger, and it also posted my general ledger. This posts my checkbook register. Okay. So I'm gonna click post, and that completes that transaction. We don't need to look at the reports. One other thing I will mention about that. With the newest releases of GP, and I don't remember when this went back to, maybe GP 2013 or 2015, they developed a new checkbox on the administration window. Let's go to that real quick. Administration, setup, company, and options. The very last option is something called automatically post cash receipts deposits. If you get tired of, or you find yourself forgetting to do that last step, the deposit entry, you can turn on and automatically post cash receipts deposits, and it'll create that deposit transaction for you. So you don't have to do it manually. That's in the newest releases of GP. That's a kind of a time-saving tool. The thing you have to think about there is you need your batches to be your deposit total. So you want to put everything for a deposit, that's one deposit, into a batch so they'll match to the bank. Okay, so that's cash receipts. Let's go back to our presentation here. I included in my demo, in my presentation, the apply window that we looked at, as well as the distribution window. We don't need to go through those here. But let's talk about the next topic. Let's talk about apply sales documents. So we had that $14 that was unapplied left over on that national deposit, right? We applied most of the money, but we left a little bit behind. We didn't know what to do with that $14. So let's say we come along later and we figure out what we need to do with the $14. So what are we going to do? We're going to go to the sales pane, transactions, apply sales documents, or on the menus, we'll go to transactions, sales, apply sales documents, and we're gonna open the apply sales documents window. It's going to look like this. Let's jump over to GP. Here I am at the apply sales documents. I open that window. I enter the customer because I know it. Oh, I can't type, but I know it. So there's the customer. I want to find the document that's outstanding for them. So here I've got 3 payments for this customer, but here's one that's got a $14 remaining balance, and now I know what I want to do with that $14. And so I'm going to come in and I'm going to apply it. It shows me, again, since it's a national account, it shows me all of the customers related to this relationship. So the national account as well as the child accounts shows me all of their outstanding invoices. And I can come down here and say, hey, this is a $14 payment on maybe this invoice here. And so I apply it there. And so I can use this apply window. I can use the auto apply, the unapply button just like I did in the other windows, or I can go down and pick the individual invoice to apply the payment to. You can see in this case, it's applying $14 on a $253, well, it was a $267 invoice. There's $253 left on that invoice now after I do this application. If I say okay, it'll apply it. There's no journal entries to make, right? Because I'm not recording any additional cash. I'm not writing off any balance. All I'm doing is applying the cash receipt versus the invoice. And so I'm removing both of those, part of both of those records from the outstanding receivable balance for this customer. Not changing the receivable balance total, because if they owed, you know, $10,000 before, they owe $10,000 after this. All I'm doing is taking unapplied cash and posting it to the invoice. Okay, that's the apply sales document. All right. The next thing to talk about is Lockbox. I want to mention this only because this is a feature that some people don't realize is there. If you've got a relationship set up with your bank where you have a deposit account, a Lockbox account set up, and you've told your customers send payments to the Lockbox, then you're already accumulating your money in the bank account quickly, but then you're having to go into GP and record each of those transactions individually. GP's Lockbox function allows you the ability to real quickly get those into GP. Some of the advantages of Lockbox: you already own this tool. There's no licensing fees to use it. It's not a third-party tool. If you set up a Lockbox relationship, as opposed to getting the checks in your hand, this eliminates the need to take those deposits to the bank. You can have the check sent directly to the bank. Makes your cash faster, available faster. The GP Lockbox function gives you the ability to automatically import and apply those customer payments. And so you start with a file from your bank and you apply those payments. You import those transactions, and it tries to find the customer and the invoices to apply that payment to. Speeds up the processing of handling your receipts. So that's the Lockbox function. And then the last thing I want to talk about are the receivables transaction entry and the sales order processing transaction entry, where you can record cash directly on your receiving your invoice transaction. So again, sales pane, we'll go to transactions, transaction entry for the receivables module. And it looks like this. And so the only thing that's different about this is, instead of letting this $50, in this case, it's $53.50 flow through to accounts receivable, I'm receiving cash up front. I'm recording it at the same time I'm recording the invoice. And that's what this function does here. I put the $53.50 on the check line. That opens up this little expansion window over to the left, and I put in what checkbook it's related to, what the check number was from the customer, the deposit date, and I can post the cash at the same time I post the invoice. Typically, when you post an invoice, you're debiting AR, crediting sales revenue. In this case, I'm debiting the bank account, crediting sales revenue. So I'm accomplishing both those transactions at the same time. Likewise, over in sales transaction entry, for the sales order processing module, you can do the same thing. The windows look a little different. Here's your sales transaction entry window. There's an amount received down there at the bottom. I put that in. As soon as I put that in, it's going to pop up another window where I've got to define the checkbook ID, the deposit date. It assigns a cash receipt number, and And what I'll have to do is insert that payment into this distribution line down here. Once I've done that, then that payment's is going to flow through to my checkbook. And I will have accomplished, again, both the recording the cash as well as the sales transaction. Okay, and then let's just talk about real quickly what we talked about. We talked about cash
Hey,
receipts.
Bill.
Yeah.
I apologize to interrupt. We just got a few more minutes for this section, and we have a couple questions. Do you think we could get to the Q&A really quick?
Yes. Let's do the Q&A.
Perfect. Okay. Lily asks, I get a lot of requests to unapply cash posting. Is there a best practice on when to unapply using PSTL, or when a void should be leveraged, or a credit/rebill?
Well, the PSTL tool obviously is easier to use than doing a void and a rebill. Void and rebill is a lot of manual intensive work. The negatives about the PSTL are that you kind of need to run that when nobody's in the system or nobody's editing some receivables transactions, and so it takes a little bit of coordination. I wouldn't say there's a best practice. PSTL is, and what she's talking about here, just so people know, on your home screen. Oh, I don't have it here. I must have it down here. PSTL. There is a receivables module unapply, transaction unapply here button. And it's pretty easy to do, pretty quickly to go in and unapply a payment for a customer. I don't know if there's a best practice. I think once the transaction has moved to history, I think you can't do the PSTL tool, and you'll have to do voids and reissues. But certainly both are good choices.
Okay.
What else,
Brad?
Brad?
Great, thanks. Lily, if we need to follow up with you on that, just let us know. We'll be happy to. Yvonne asks, why would you want the document date and the GL date to be different?
You know, for cash receipts, you probably don't. More often than not, you think of cash receipts probably going to be the same date. You could have, let's say, for some reason you want to know the date that the customer had on the check and use that as the document date for the transaction, but the date going to the bank is your GL posting date. Maybe you've got terms that are based on the date that the customer sends you the payment as opposed to when you receive it. I don't know. Typically for cash receipts, they would be the same, but there's really not, they don't have to be, I think is the point I was making. Typically, though, they would be the same.